So first of all, I apologize. We're going to cover some areas that I think were started on the previous panel, but let me dispense with some opening remarks and just, since we're going to talk about privacy and you've heard a lot of the issues, you wouldn't mind if I turn around and just talk to the panel? No, probably that's not probably a good idea, but let me just introduce the members of our panel. Quickly, and again, in the spirit of time, I will go into less description of each of the individuals, but Gregor Vogelsang from Booz and Company, based in Munich, and obviously everybody knows the wonderful work Booz does, and Gregor and I spent some time chatting about his involvement in the marketing services arena, so it'll be interesting to hear your perspective. Alain Lévy. Alain is working in Weborama and has a very interesting perspective on startup technologies and technologies that will enable advertising. So I think it'll be interesting to take that advertiser's standpoint and somebody who needs to have advertising at the core of the business. Shelly Zalis, the CEO of OTX, one of the leading online research companies based in California, but with offices all over the world, and really a pioneer in the utilization of technology for research. Yossi, Matias, who runs the R&D Center in Israel for Google and has been a long-time technology superstar, really, and somebody who understands privacy all the way back to the mid-90s, as we were talking about, so certainly not a new issue. And Elizabeth Charnock, based in Silicon Valley, and Elizabeth is going to be giving an interesting perspective, different than the rest of the folks, because her focus is not really on the advertising side of the business, but we're going to get an interesting perspective. What I'd like to do is I'd like to really begin with the question that was touched on at the end of the previous panel, which is the trust issue. So we talk about data, we talk about the utilization of data, and certainly I think it's the elephant in the middle of any room where advertising and media are being discussed. And what I would like to do is really turn to Yossi first and say, pose the following question. That trust factor between the consumer and the person who has that information, from a Google standpoint, but also from an industry standpoint, you had some interesting comment when we were chatting earlier this morning, Yossi.
Thank you. So I think that the two principles which are put forward by Google, and I believe they are really the pillars for any relationship with the users' data and users in general, are essentially transparency and choice. Now, they're not the only ones, but they are really the basic ones, because the transparency is about letting users know exactly what is being done with their data, and the choice is about letting them choose to what extent they'd like to do that. Now, once you have those, of course, you need also the trust in terms of the usage of the data, in terms of the security of the data that you're taking. And I think the reality is that once these are in place, we can look at the analogies that we have in the physical world. I heard that some people still prefer to pay in cash and to buy those instant phones to use so that nobody tracks their calls, but most people actually prefer to use credit cards and are okay with their data collected by companies that they are trusting. Unrelated, Esther mentioned the recent launch that on the dashboard, which essentially enables users to see the kind of information that they store on their behalf and actually control, make a choice about whether they want to change it, to delete, etc. And similarly with interest-based advertising, that's another example where some more targeted kind of advertising is offered, but then users are having the choice to easily change their interest as they are learned or delete them altogether.
So thank you, Yossi. Shelly, how do you turn the data into knowledge? I mean, how do you take this just mountain of data that's out there? You created as a research company, but the portals obviously have, frightening amounts of data. How do you turn that into knowledge?
That's a great question, and I think we've been hearing about data. Data's not all the same, and it's really not relevant if it's not providing insights and action-oriented decisions. So I think data is at the crux of everything that we think about, and representing the consumer. We talk to consumers all the time. They love sharing, as a matter of fact. It's not a problem. They will share as much as you want them to share. As you see on all these social network sites, they'll tell you everything that you want to know. But they want to know that that information is coming back as value added for them. They don't want to just share in, you know, the ether out there and know that it's not going anywhere. So I think we have so much data at our disposal, and we just keep collecting more and more without understanding what we really have. So I think the first thing we all have to do is understand what data we have that's providing us knowledge and get rid of the junk in the trunk, because we have a lot of it. And one of our greatest challenges with all the data points that we have today is integrating it. I mean, how many of you are sitting with data dumps on your desk, or, you know, emails full of more and more information, and wondering what it all means and does it tell a story? So I think the first thing you have to do is eliminate a lot of that data, see what those nuggets are of insights, what you really need today to build that relationship with your consumer and build that trust. And once you have that trust, those respondents will share whatever you want.
Thank you. So Alain, data collection is really at the core of as you mentioned in a previous discussion, as to what makes the internet specific. And since marketing is the lifeblood of that, as we run up against the regulations that will inevitably come down with consumer protection groups, how do we balance that? I mean, everybody wants the information, and yet we know there are a couple of key principles in terms of utilization of it. How are you dealing with that when you look at some of the emerging companies that you work with?
What's interesting is, I mean, privacy is not new to the internet. This is something, I mean, at Weborama for 10 years, we're involved in this, and for 10 years, any sales presentation I do, I start with the 3 principles of privacy that's my first slide, is anonymous data, it's opt-out, and it's capping, because you don't want to flood the users with advertising. What has changed? That's the question. Why is it today such a big issue? It's probably because the practices have evolved, and some companies have found new ways to send advertising that may be efficient, but that may be also going over the boundary. I mean, there was an interesting comment yesterday. Someone said, knowing is better than inferring, and I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. When you know that someone was at this e-commerce site, and that he was on this page looking at this product, this barbecue, and the next day he receives an advertising for a barbecue, he makes the connection. And that's the very difference. He's able to make the connection between a specific action on the web and the ad he's receiving. And that's very disturbing, and that's very new. And I think this is something we need to address. This is something very new. The consumer is coming into, I mean, there's hundreds of companies. I mean, we've seen this over the last 2 days working with data. Most of them are B2B companies. They don't know about the consumer. They don't talk to the consumer. And right now it's different. We need to find a way to communicate, to inform, and to say what we are doing, and explain and give a clear opt-out. I mean, when we are Weborama, it's B2B company. The user don't know us. So when we say we have an opt-out on our website, I mean, no one will come to our website because the user doesn't know us, and he doesn't even know we are tracking them. So this is what I call a bad faith opt-out. So you need a good faith opt-out. So just giving you an example of what we're doing, we're using our advertising format. And we saw that some of them are branded with a W, and we saw there were a lot of clicks from the users on the W. So instead of going to our website, when the guys were clicking, they come to an interactive page where we are saying, here is the kind of data we're collecting, here is how we process it, here is what we're doing with it, and that's the benefit you're taking from this. If you want to opt out, this is the time. But just a figure. I mean, we've launched that 2 weeks ago. It's tens of thousands of clicks every day. We get 20 opt-outs a day.
Well, and I think that begs an important question, which is the consumer's informed opt-in is the proper value exchange, is the proper quid pro quo, and Gregor, we were talking about this earlier, is the proper quid pro quo, gee, if I let somebody use this data, I will get targeted messages sent my way.
Right.
Is that enough? If I'm a consumer and I'm in the market for a car, I want to see those ads. We all know that. Don't send me ads if I'm not in the market. But if I am, will I feel that that's a good enough value exchange?
Yeah, I think in the media marketing ecosystem, and where I do most of my work, I think there's two things that are really important: context and action. I mean, there's data, and there's data, and there's data usage, and there's data usage. And actually, it changes depending on the context in which you gather data, use data, and move them to action. It's a very different thing if I use data that I exchange in friendship. It's a very different thing from data that are used in marketing. And again, it's a different thing from data that companies use to watch over their employees. And for the media marketing system, it's really important to understand the context in which they use data and in which they sort of help consumers along making choices. The other thing is action. We should not overestimate the capabilities of most marketers and brands in actually using data and moving to action. This is one of the biggest challenges that we see in the media marketing ecosystem, where we're talking a lot about data and using data and analyzing data and moving to customer insights. But in fact, the key challenge for most of the players in that ecosystem is actually to move to action, to bring it to the consumer and entice the consumer to do something, i.e. buy something. Most players are still way far from that movement from data to analysis to insight to action. Many actually get stuck already in the first part of this whole thing. They lack the talent, they lack the analytics, and they lack actually the organizational structures. Many brands are organized in silos. Moving information, massive information, insight across those silos is a huge challenge for most marketers.
I think also just because you can get data doesn't mean you should. I think that's just really important. And I think how you communicate back is just more relevant than anything. I received a call the other day from a charitable organization to participate in their organization. And I was ready to make a significant contribution to a cause that, I thought sounded very interesting, when all of a sudden the person on the phone said to me, and we know that you gave to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and that you gave this amount to each of those organizations, and we are hoping that you will at least match or exceed your last gift. And I said, are you kidding? I said, count me out. I mean, I never gave permission for anyone to know that about me. And this is this teleprompter basically on the phone talking to me about my giving. And it not only forbid me from giving, I was not going to give, but it isolated me. And it made me really feel very negative. And so there's really a very fine line. And when you brought up, and it's so true about friendship, when you love someone, you're willing to share a lot of information because you naturally trust them. But if you just meet somebody and it's a stranger, you're willing to give them less information. So it's really context and how you apply it.
But let me just redirect that question to Elizabeth for a moment, because Elizabeth, to that point, one of the things you and I talked about was people's willingness to post things on the one hand willy-nilly on a social networking site or Twitter about this or that, but on the other hand put real stakes in the ground in terms of what they want corporations to use to entice the sale of a product or service.
Well, I agree very much with what Gregor has said here, that as a practical matter, people put their boundaries in very different places for many different reasons, not just because they have trust in a particular individual or company, but let's face it, on Facebook, what are people doing? They're promoting their lives. They're saying how great everything is. I just bought this really great Sony TV or Prada purse or whatever it might be. And if 3 or 4 days later they decide the TV doesn't work or whatever it was a ripoff, they're probably not going to publicize it as broadly, but they're going to complain about how badly they feel to their fewer friends. Our take on this is a bit different because we actually mostly look at the data you all don't have. My company does software for modeling communications online across Twitter, IMs, emails, wiki posts, what have you, but we mostly look at what's done inside corporations. So that's all of the data that you don't have access to. And it's very different often than what goes on online, in part because it's operating within this trusted boundary, and in part because there's a presumption that nobody's ever going to see it. Yet in the US, 70% of corporations do monitor their employees, and there's a lot of opportunity, therefore, to see what goes on in a way that you're not currently doing that's more within the veil of trust.
Coming back to the veil of trust, Yossi, what do you think, and I know you talked about what Google was doing now in terms of being able to see what you've got, but what do you think people should have to tell consumers about what they have? I mean, how far do you think that should go?
Let me start with the observation that for many applications, actually, you don't necessarily need all the details information about users. So a lot of insights can be obtained from aggregated data. In fact, what I wanted to show, and I invite you all to take a look at that on your own, is some usage of such aggregated data for insights into what people are searching for. So let me perhaps say a few words on that. So it was mentioned yesterday in a panel that one common user behavior is that after being exposed to something in the media, users are going quite often, some of them, and searching for related information on the web. Given that there's an estimated of some 2 billion searches per day, then looking into what people are searching for in the aggregate is quite telling. One can think about it as perhaps one of the biggest focus groups on the world, in the world, that you can actually find out what people's interest is, etc. So one technology that we have developed in Israel is called Google Trends, or a more advanced version, Google Insights for Search, which essentially enables anybody to take a look into what users' interests are in the sense of what users are searching for and how this changes over time. Now, this is an aggregated information on anonymized data. So it's really not about what a particular user is looking for, but what groups of users are looking for in pretty fine granularity. So for example, we could find out what are the topmost popular search terms in France for the last 30 days, or how is the change of global warming over time, and how much people are searching for Obama versus McCain when this was relevant. Or even identify who's going to win American Idol, or perhaps X Factor, I understand is the comparable here in the UK, based on users' interest as they are reflected in searches. Now, it turns out that this is very powerful for marketing, for media analysis. You have a campaign, you can actually have a few campaigns and instantly get a sense within a day of how it affects users' searches. And learn about insights into what's going on there. It turns out that even it has applications beyond marketing. For example, the recent works showed a correlation between economic trends, the macroeconomic indicators, to all sorts of categories. And this actually became a category within Google Finance. You can actually have indicators which are real-time based on Google searches. And a last example on that perhaps is that for public health, we could find some correlation between searches for terms related to, say, flu symptoms to actual flu outbreaks in the world, and created something called flu trends, which essentially gives kind of an early warning, if you will, about the increase of searches for flu, which, according to some studies, is about 2 weeks earlier than the data that we get from the CDC, from the Center Control Disease.
Well,
so these are all examples about using aggregated data. Getting back to your question, so what does the user need to get?
Well, but to your point, your chairman spoke at the Association of National Advertisers conference in Phoenix last week, and he made that very same point, that the searches for things like dancing and dining are, macro indicators in terms of economic trends, and maybe after all we are coming out of recession, if you will, based on early warnings for the kinds of searches that are being done on a macro aggregated basis, to your point.
Correct. So these are all aggregated. So this is to make the point that in many cases the aggregated information is extremely powerful Now, having said that, obviously there are many other applications, some of them discussed here in previous panels, about how to have better targeting in an individual basis for users, especially if we want to allow some to offer users advertising or other offerings based on recent activities. And here we get into a different question of value exchange, and again, getting back, I think that users, as long as they have the choice to what extent they want to get these services, in many cases they would like to get these more personalized kind of services. We need to be clever about it, just as we do in the real world. I think the behavioral mentioned earlier is something that we would consider not very smart, even if we get into a store and somebody is making a remark based on common knowledge. So some of it is not so much technology or privacy, etc. It's basic common sense about people's behavior. So as long as we keep in mind that these are all trade-offs and we have a value exchange and we keep the basic principles, then I think we're going to be good.
But again, sorry, but I think, again, the issue is not in the aggregation of data and using aggregation.
Can we try one? Can we disagree on something? I just want everyone to disagree about something, anything, it's okay. I'm kidding, go ahead, please.
Well, let me think a bit. No, I mean, I don't think the issue is in aggregation of data and using aggregated data to run a sort of general marketing campaigns. The issue is when brands invade the personal space of the user. And there they are in a dilemma, because A, they need to really understand the context in which they are doing this, and if they're doing it the wrong way, A, it fires back, and B, in the viral culture of the web, they don't know what's happening with this event. It can spread rapidly and do a lot of harm and damage to the brands.
Or good.
Or good.
Or good. I'm just trying to disagree.
I think also we should not forget that behavioral data is fantastic, and in this digital day and age, we have tons of it. But as a survey researcher, we can't forget talking to our consumers, and the why matters as well. We forget the why. We have what sites people go to, what people are doing. We do media measurement, we do longitudinal studies up the wazoo. But, I can tell you that someone is online 8 times a day and spending, 8 hours and multitasking on steroids. But just because they're online 8 times a day doesn't mean they're doing the same thing. And so the more we can also go into more dimension of what we are seeing with all the data, when we understand the whys, that's when we will get the knowledge as well.
Alain?
Yeah, well, I think, we all agree that there is a lot of quality information and that the internet works on the basis of data. We have right now to solve a problem, which is, and I think it's an important problem, and we shouldn't underestimate it, which is we need to talk to the consumer. We don't want any regulation. I mean, we hear about opt-in cookie. I mean, if this goes through, the net is dead. So this should not happen, and we should find solution among us. But this is very difficult. I mean, it's very easy to have a very small and consensus, which is not very thrilling. I mean, we're all working in various groups, IAB and so on. We come to agreements, but now we need to take this among us and push it forward. I think we need interprofessional but serious and individual communication with the consumer. That's a challenge for us.
Elizabeth, let me just flip over to you for a second. So as we're talking about the individual, you, as you said, alluded to earlier, you deal with the corporate side of it in many of these instances. Are there any sort of seismic events that happen within these corporations that you're working with that force them? I mean, we hear all the data about information being stolen and, this and that. When you are brought in to help those corporations, how are they reacting?
Well, we're often brought in after the disaster has occurred, or when the disaster is at least feared, and of course that changes our perspective quite a bit. Where we operate, there's absolutely no privacy, and fine, I'll pick a fight with some of you. I don't believe there's that much privacy even when lots of data is aggregated. There's that wonderful example of some researchers a few years ago combining IMDb and Netflix data that was made available anonymously as part of the Netflix contest. Because guess what? Not so many people review those movies that are, on the long side of the tail. And once as a corporation you get sued in some way that you're going to remember. How are you going to remember it? Well, your stock price went to hell. Your CEO got fired. Your brand was really damaged. You're going to start looking more at what your employees do. I've not actually had a chance to follow it because I've been in Europe, but I understand, for example, that the incident at Fort Hood was in some ways foreshadowed in email that nobody was really looking at. It's things like that that really change the perception of where's the line in the sand, how much privacy is too much. You know, everybody can agree, and I assume even all of you on this panel, that if there's some way to monitor people who may be committing terrorist acts or who are into child pornography or something like that, we're all good with that. Everybody's going to agree on that.
Wait a minute, we're all good with that, or we're all good with finding out about
Well, I
it?
think we're all good with finding out about it.
We're looking for a little, come on.
But where we could probably really start to fight is where that bright white starts to become light gray, starts to become dark gray. It's part of what I'm writing a book on that comes out this summer is, you know, what are all the traces we leave of ourselves, and what's legitimately okay for other people to profit from? What am I putting out there about myself that I am aware of, and what am I putting out there about myself that I'm really not aware of, but that little bits of firmament are going to stick to the internet. And the more sophisticated tools, whether it's for the reasons I'm doing it or the reasons Alain is doing it, are going to become more and more powerful, and advertisers, if they wish, are going to be able to not just look at what you're doing today, but look at what you did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and probably, I would dare say, even predict what you're going to do 5 years from now and market to you accordingly.
Hey, can I ask a question of all of us? I mean, am I allowed to ask a question and just see your faces for a second? Have we ever done a study in our industry, maybe I'm uninformed, but that really, in the day of co-creation and collaboration, have we ever asked consumers, you know, not to say that they can dictate our business model, but to hear what they have to say, that if we, you know, get this and this and this kind of information from you, all kinds of PII, in exchange, what would you expect back, and look at different levels of ask versus give? Have we ever done that?
Well, I'm certain that it's been done, but the question begs another question, which,
Audience
well, please.
participation.
Sorry, a little bit on the fly. Yeah, shout.
Go, girl.
Pedraza, at least for, sorry about that. The Luxury Institute, Milton Pedraza, actually did a study just on the luxury consumer specifically, asking them what information would you be willing to give over and what information would you require us to use. It was interesting, the luxury consumer specifically said, I am happy to give you anything. I want you to track my purchase history. I want you to track, you know, my credit card information. I want you to know everything there is to know about me, provided you give me results and information that is relevant to me on a regular basis, and that you make offers to me very personalized. That's all they ask in return. Make it personal.
Well, and I think that goes right to the heart of it. And one of the things that came out in a conversation earlier this year on privacy was where are the, and this is really a question thrown out to the panelists, but as well to the audience, where are the creative forces in the marketing and communications business to inform the consumer of exactly that? I mean, the creative advertising agencies, putting them in a bucket for a moment, although I don't think that we can have those sorts of silos anymore in the industry, but the creative advertising agencies might want to spend some time on messaging that to the consumer to really find out, because at the end of the day, an informed opt-in needs to be marketed. I mean, I think that's a question. And again, in the spirit of time, because we did have a bit of a truncated session, I'm going to open this up interactively to conversation from the audience and questions from the audience. So,
can I just make
yes, please, Yossi.
Well, I just want to highlight, since just to remind, since the panel was about challenges and opportunities, and we seem to have spent most of the time about the challenges, just to highlight and to remember what is this data used for. And at the end of the day, I think that the data analysis, getting the insights into what we do, makes all the businesses and the economy and other disciplines more efficient, more effective, to the benefit of everybody. So it needs to be done right. But I also want to highlight that we're really only scratching the surface in terms of what can be done with data and algorithms. And Maurice made it a point yesterday that it's really going to be based on math and algorithms and scalability, which personally, of course, I subscribe to this. I think we're really only scratching the surface on that. If you look back, it's only about a decade ago we couldn't even handle this kind of data, scalability and all that stuff. Some of the basics are in pretty good shape now, but we're really very basic algorithms employed to date, and they're already making huge impacts on several disciplines, on relevant advertising, etc. So we should remember a decade from now, it's going to be a whole lot more efficient, more personalized, and more beneficial on the opportunity side.
Great. Yes.
Hello. This is probably a stupid question, but you know.
Can we be the judge of that?
Yeah. I personally don't like giving away personal data on the net. I don't like receiving personalized offer. I don't like advertising. And so sorry about that. Sorry, publicity.
Do you have a bodyguard?
Sorry, Maurice. Yeah, I know. Sorry, Maurice, if he's here. Is there an opt-out solution for me?
He's right behind you.
No, please. I mean, Jesus. Oh, Maurice is here. Jesus. Sorry, Maurice. Okay. Okay. Can the Google, Facebook, Twitters of the world offer me the possibility of paying them a couple of bucks a month to get advertising-free service? I'm ready. Is that a possibility?
It's called a subscription model, and it's
no. Wait. I mean, it's an option.
No, but it exists. It exists, and it's free. I mean, you go to Firefox and you use AdBlock, and you won't have any ad.
That's right. But then you have Twitter, then you have you have Facebook. I mean, you know.
Well, only if you go on Facebook or Twitter.
I could have the choice. I'm pro-choice in this
I'm not in the
field.
advertising business, so I'm the only person here with no axe to grind. But there's no opt-out button for the brick and mortar world either. Exactly. Why should you expect one online?
Right.
Because we're progressing. This is progress.
This is fodder for another conversation. Yes.
Hi. I'd like to go back to Shelly's question with regard to consumer insights and the wealth of data, the digital data dilemma that exists right now. From my experience in my business, one of the biggest issues right now is the gap between the consumer and corporations. And while we have this digital data, which we're all being flooded with, to actually find those consumer insight nuggets are almost impossible. And one key point with O2 and Telefonica, one thing that my company has done is tried to bridge the gap by using consumers to co-create through open source innovation. And it is probably one of the most difficult business procedures that I've ever undergone in my career. When you sit around with 14 board members of a corporation and the street, consumers, trying to put product innovation and development together. And I'd be interested to know how many companies are moving in that direction, which actually taking the algorithms and the data and turning that into tangible, tactical innovation in product design and development.
Please.
This is all really exciting, and I love the idea of the opportunity conversation, because I think what we're going to see a lot of next year is data visualization tools, and let me add more azations. We're going to see data visualization, we're going to see data integration, we're going to see a lot of synthesizing tools so that it can aggregate all the data, disparate data that we get from multiple different companies. But I think from a perspective of the consumer, we're building a lot of listening tools, listening labs, and not to say, and they're qualitative in nature, even though I hate the word qualitative and quantitative, I don't know what that means anymore, but they're very immersive tools of just having consumers share their thoughts and feelings and trying to have a conversation about what matters. Whether we embrace all of those ideas is, decisions for each companies to decide, but consumers have big ideas, and they get it, and they really want to tell you what they want to do, and they want to share. They just want you to listen.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we don't leave the monopoly to those who are by nature anti-advertising. Everyone should be able to express their view on the subject, and I'm sure Most of the users, they understand perfectly that the internet doesn't work without advertising.
Absolutely.
If I can just to comment on that, I don't think advertising is necessarily a compromise. We know that when it's relevant, when it's targeted, it's becoming information. So the important thing is to make advertising part of the ecosystem of information provided to users, and then there's a blend between the two.
On a relevant and contextual nature. Do we have time for one more question? Was there a question over here, or am I mistaken? Yes.
When this device will eventually become to be important media, and it will very soon will become to be important media, I will be even more sensitive to advertising, as this gentleman said. So how you could capture my interests related to my context, where I am, what time is the day, what is my preference, and offer me something that it's more than advertising, lead generation for something that I want to do.
Well, I don't want to answer the question, but I think, as Yossi pointed out, if it's really contextual and if it's interest to you, maybe it's information, it's not advertising at that point.
What I could say, having tens and tens of terabytes of really what people do every day, all the email and IMs and everything that they send, most people are incredibly creatures of habit. So with enough of your data, for both better and worse, you know, some of these guys could probably do a really good job of figuring out what you would probably want badly enough to be willing to deal with it on your cell phone and not, or portable device, and not be annoyed by it, and in fact maybe even be enthralled by it.
Well, and let me also make a point here. I think that when we talk about algorithms and where technology need to go, I would always like to think about the Turing test for artificial intelligence, which is essentially that program technology is indistinguishable from an expert human that would give you the same advice, or it would give you advice on the same questions. I think, again, utilizing data properly, we are approaching to that. We're still a long way to go before we get there, but the more contextual information we have, we're better approaching there. And the nice thing is that I believe that on these trade-offs between personalization, technology, and all that stuff, technology can help in making these trade-offs pretty good. So we can even do that in a way which safeguards the kind of stuff that we want to keep.
So does that finally dispel what my mother taught me, that she always knew the right answer? I don't have, that's not true anymore, right?
Well, you'll have your mother implement. Yeah.
Michael, we must have the same mothers, because my mother was always right too.
Exactly.
So.
No, my mother said she wasn't always right, but she was never wrong. That's
Listen, I want to thank you guys.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Just don't go away. Yossi, do you want to